The advice I would give to somebody trying to implement a formalized data governance program is to focus on a few key issues. Number one is focus on business value. Governance shouldn't be done for governance sake. Governance should be done to enable a specific business outcome. So focus on specific use cases, specific outcomes, like reducing your supplier risk, or cross-selling, or upselling, or onboarding new customers. Whatever those use cases are, specifically focus on those and the business outcomes that they will drive. That's number one. Number two is not all data is created equally, right? So if you're focused on specific outcomes, right, that will naturally drive you towards specific governance policies and procedures that are focused on those outcomes, focused on the data that drives the value. Well, MDM is absolutely foundational, but it is the symbiotic relationship between governance and MDM. If you go about deploying an MDM solution, you have to make some decisions that are inherently governance decisions. How do I define my customers? How do I define my suppliers? When is data accurate? When is data inaccurate? These are all governance decisions that have to be made in conjunction with the deployment of MDM. One has to exist with the other. So these decisions will be made naturally as you evolve towards an MDM program, as you understand which data is more important than other data, which is your master data. So these things exist together. These decisions will be made together. But if you're prioritized on the data that matters the most, that enables those outcomes, those use cases that we were talking about, you will find a way to evolve into a more of an agile approach to governance instead of this boil the ocean approach to governance, which will take you an awfully long time.
This is often the MDM, multi-domain tools like Profisee are often the first time the business gets to model the data in the way the business really works, as opposed to business application data models dictating how the process is going to have to run in order to get the data into these databases that become silos. So it could, you may have really have two or three different types of customer that they all look like one right now because you're forced to do that. For the first time, you don't have to. So there can be a pretty freeing modeling exercise around all that common data across the silos.
Right, and what you're really saying here, Bill, is that context matters. Right, and we've evolved beyond this kind of monolithic single version of the truth type approach to MDM to more contextual versions of the customer, more contextual approaches to managing data, where that you could have a finance view, you can have a support view, you can have a sales view, and they can all exist together, right? This is kind of more of the notion of contextual MDM or potentially augmented MDM, where these different views and these different contexts can all, for lack of a better word, win, and you don't have to pick a single winner.
And that also briefly would bring in the notion of fit for purpose there.
Perfect.
Right? So perfect might not be what marketing needs, but it might be what finance needs.
Right.
And so can marketing use finance's data if it's perfect, or did it lose something along the way?
Right. But companies still struggle with this notion of a single winner, right? Or a single owner, right? Companies will often articulate, well, who owns the customer, right? Or who owns the supplier? Well, in the context of master data, well, everybody does, right? Because it's truly shared across business silos, across functions. Everybody should have a say in how that data is used and how that data is defined. This inherently gets to the notion of this data modeling exercise that you were talking about. But both groups can be right at the same time and have the data be represented slightly differently.
Yeah, I think that's a function of silos, actually.
Right.
When you have multiple contenders, there has to be a winner when they get brought together. It's usually not done properly.
Agreed.
MDM is the chance to do that, and right down to the data model that says, well, wait a second, these things really aren't the same, or they really are. Let's conform them, or you know what, we should stop trying to conform them because they're not.
Right.
These businesses are two different things. We should model it that way when we bring them together. You need to consider master data as part of generating business value right away. If you don't actively identify what master data is and develop that skill right away, you'll do it almost by accident. You'll start trying to identify everything, and eventually you'll notice there are things that are repeating. Once you do identify it, whether it's the best practice way or not, passively or actively, the next thing you want to do is manage it. And that's where MDM technology comes in. It starts to enforce those rules that you formulated and arrived at as part of governance.
Now, this notion of passive kind of management of data governance, I see this all the time. And it's when IT organizations take a disproportionate ownership stake over an early stage governance initiative, where IT will define rules and governance policies and governance procedures masked as requirements for an MDM initiative. right? And when you take that approach, you run a lot of risks, right? IT owning things that ultimately the business should own. So we want to absolutely avoid that kind of that passive approach to data governance and be more active in defining a program from the start.